She returns to a place she swore she'd never see again, trying to escape a past that still hurts. Everything seems quiet and ordinary until small signs begin to stir up trouble. What looked like just a new beginning uncovers something that's been hidden for decades. And this discovery completely changes the meaning of her own story. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing on, Helen never imagined she would return to Havenwood, Vermont. The small New England town, with its colonial churches and steep, winding roads, was just a distant childhood memory from those summers when her grandmother Claire would take her to visit old friends. But life has a way of serving up cruel ironies, turning the past into a refuge when the present falls apart. Her luxury SUV seemed out of place on those narrow streets, drawing more attention than Helen was comfortable with. She drove slowly, observing the colonial-style windows adorned with simple Christmas lights, the residents waving to each other as if they'd all known one another forever. It was early December, and the town was already breathing in the holiday spirit with a simplicity she had forgotten existed. The house was on Chestnut Street, a two-story building with thick walls and wooden windows with faded blue shutters. Helen parked in front of the rusted iron gate and just stared for a few minutes. This was the house of her great-aunt Eleanor, her grandmother Claire's younger sister, who had passed away a few months ago. A house that was now hers, inherited almost by chance, since no one else in the family was interested in an old property in a small town. When she got out of the car, the chill of the Vermont afternoon surprised her. In New York City, even in winter, the concrete held the heat. Here the wind swept down from the mountains, bringing a damp coolness that seeped into her bones. Helen pulled her Italian wool coat tighter and opened the trunk. 2 large suitcases, a handbag, and a box with the only personal belongings she'd wanted to bring. The rest was left behind, along with the life she no longer wanted. The key was exactly where the lawyer said it would be, under the 3rd fern pot on the side porch. Helen smiled ironically. In New York, no one would leave a key in such an obvious place, but here, apparently, people still trusted each other. As she opened the door, the smell of a closed-up house filled her nostrils. Must, old wood, and something reminiscent of lavender. The windows were all shut, and the little light that filtered through the slats of the blinds drew golden lines on the wide plank wood floors. Helen walked down the hallway to the living room, where furniture covered in white sheets looked like ghosts from a time long past. She left her bags at the entrance and went straight to open the windows. She needed air, light, something to make her feel that this wasn't just another mistake in a series of bad decisions. When the last window swung open, the view took her by surprise. From there she could see the backyard with its gnarled old apple trees, and in the distance, the steeple of St. Francis Church, silhouetted against a sky that was beginning to take on the orange hues of dusk. That's when she heard the noise. An engine sputtering, insistent, coming from the side garage. Helen frowned. The lawyer hadn't mentioned anything about cars. She went down the 3 steps leading to the side corridor and pushed open the wooden garage door. There it was, a brown Chevy Nova, an old model, covered in a thin layer of dust. Helen walked over and ran her hand over the hood. It was cold. The car must have been sitting there for months, maybe since Aunt Eleanor had become too frail to drive. But then, where was the engine noise coming from? The answer came from the backyard. Helen walked around the house and found a man crouched next to a disassembled motorcycle. His hands were covered in grease, his dark hair was a bit messy, and he wore a simple t-shirt with a denim vest over it. He looked to be in his early 30s, with an angular face weathered by the sun and a few days of stubble. He looked up when he noticed her and stood up in a quick motion, wiping his hands on an old rag hanging from the pocket of his worn-out jeans. Helen braced herself for his reaction. She knew the kind of look she usually got, a beautiful, well-dressed woman, clearly an outsider. But what came wasn't what she expected. The man smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his tired face, and extended his right hand before realizing it was dirty with grease. He laughed a little sheepishly and wiped it better on the rag before trying again. "Ryan Miller, I live next door. Nice to meet the new neighbor. Mrs. Eleanor always said someone from the family would come take care of the house one day. Helen shook his hand, feeling the rough texture of someone who works with their hands. Ryan, I'm Helen Carter. I'm Mrs. Eleanor's great-niece. My condolences for your loss. She was a wonderful person, beloved around here. Always had hot coffee and a slice of cake for anyone who stopped by. Helen nodded, not quite sure what to say. The truth was, she barely knew her great-aunt Eleanor. She had visited maybe 3 or 4 times in her life, always in tow with her grandmother Claire. But that wasn't something she would share with a stranger. Thank you. I'm here to sort things out. Figure out what to do with the house. Ryan stuck his hands in his pockets, a bit awkwardly. Look, I don't want to be nosy, but I noticed that Nova in the garage has been sitting for a long time. The battery's probably dead. Spark plugs are likely shot. If you need a hand taking a look at it, that's what I do. I have a small shop nearby. Helen looked at him with some surprise. She wasn't used to offers of help that didn't come with ulterior motives or implied costs. And how much do you charge? Ryan shrugged. For a neighbor and all, we can figure it out. It costs nothing to do a basic check. If you need parts, then we'll settle. But just to take a look, see what's wrong, I'm happy to do it. Helen was silent for a moment. Part of her, the part shaped by years in New York City amidst contracts, lawyers, and people who only do things for something in return, was suspicious of this free kindness. But another part, tired and a little lost, just wanted to accept the help, without question. That would be very kind of you. Thank you. Ryan nodded. Then it's a plan. I'll stop by tomorrow morning if you don't mind. I'm usually up early. No problem. I'm an early riser too. Ryan hesitated, as if he wanted to say something more but ended up just wishing her a good afternoon and went back to his disassembled motorcycle in his yard. Helen stood there for a few more moments, watching him work with the quiet concentration of someone who knows and loves what they do. Back inside the house, Helen began removing the sheets from the furniture. Each revealed piece was a surprise. A solid wood sofa with embroidered cushions, a bookshelf filled with old books, a sideboard with delicate porcelain objects. Aunt Eleanor had refined taste, but it was different from the ostentatious luxury Helen knew. Here everything had history, weight, meaning. In the kitchen, she found cast-iron pans hanging from a rack, glass jars with handwritten labels, and a wood-burning stove next to the gas one. Helen opened the refrigerator, and of course it was empty and unplugged. She would have to go to the market, but not today. Today she just wanted to take a shower and sleep. The upstairs bathroom had old tiles, white and blue, forming geometric patterns. The electric showerhead looked new, probably installed recently. Helen let the hot water run over her tense body, washing away not just the dust from the trip, but also some of the weight she had been carrying on her shoulders since the hospital, since saying goodbye to her grandmother Claire, since the terrible argument with her mother and uncles, since she discovered that the only person who truly loved her in that family was gone forever. Wrapped in a towel, Helen went to the master bedroom. The bed was made with a white crochet bedspread and pillows with embroidered cases. Beside it on the nightstand was a frame with an old photo. Helen picked it up and sat on the edge of the bed to look more closely. In the black and white photograph, 4 serious-looking women posed in front of a building Helen didn't recognize. The youngest of them was unmistakably her grandmother Claire, perhaps in her 20s. Beside her was Aunt Eleanor, a little younger. The other 2 women were strangers. One of them was holding something in her hands. It looked like an embroidery or a piece of fabric. On the back of the photo, a sentence written in neat cursive. The True Masters, December 1957. Helen turned the photo over again, studying the faces of those women. What masters? Masters of what? Grandmother Claire had never mentioned anything about this, nor had Aunt Eleanor in the few times they had spoken. She put the photo back in its place and lay down, pulling the heavy blanket over her body. Outside, the church bells rang, marking 6 o'clock. Helen closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. Her mind spun in circles, replaying decisions, losses, choices. She had left everything behind. The apartment on Park Avenue, The brand new car, the designer clothes, the social events, the friends who were never really friends. After her grandmother passed, Helen realized with painful clarity that she was completely alone in that life built on appearances. The Carter family was well known in New York, import-export companies, high-end boutiques, a success story told and retold in business magazines. But behind the glossy covers, Helen knew the truth. She knew about the shady deals, the elegant scams, the exploitation disguised as partnerships. She knew the emotional void that filled those brightly lit ballrooms where everyone smiled without real joy. Grandmother Claire was different. She was the only one who questioned, who gave, who cared about people, and not just numbers on a balance sheet. And when she was gone, she took with her the last thread that still tied Helen to that world. The sound of a child laughing drifted into the room through the slightly open window. Helen got up and went to it. In the yard next door, a little girl was chasing a mutt. Ryan was sitting on the porch steps, watching his daughter play with a tired smile on his face. Helen stepped back from the window and returned to bed. Tomorrow would be a new day. Tomorrow, she would start organizing the house, discovering more about this town, about the life Aunt Eleanor had here, and maybe about those women in the old photograph. But for now, she just wanted to sleep without dreaming of hospitals or judgmental stares, to sleep and wake up in a place where no one knew who she was or where she came from, a place where she could perhaps discover who she really wanted to be. The night chill deepened, and Helen pulled another blanket from the old wardrobe. Outside, the first stars began to appear in the clear Havenwood sky, and for the first time in many months, Helen felt something like peace. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was an inner silence she hadn't known for a long time. Are you enjoying this story? Tell me your opinion of it, and how you think it will end. Helen woke to the sound of a hammer hitting metal. She glanced at the clock on the nightstand and saw it was just past 7. She got up, put on a pair of jeans and a comfortable sweater, tied her long hair into a ponytail, and went down to the kitchen. Ryan was in the garage, already working. On the Nova. The hood was open and he was tinkering with something in the engine, with the quiet concentration of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. "Good morning," Helen said, leaning against the doorframe. Ryan looked up and smiled. "Morning. Sorry if the noise woke you. I could have started later." "It's no problem. I was waking up anyway. Want some coffee?" Ryan hesitated, wiping his hands on the rag. "Oh, I don't want to be a bother." "It's no bother. I need to make coffee anyway, and I confess I have no idea where to start in this old kitchen." Ryan laughed. "Mrs. Eleanor's kitchen is a treasure. She made the best cornbread muffins in the whole area. Bella, my daughter, was always asking her to make them." Helen felt a pang in her chest, realizing there was a whole life, a whole history in that house that she had never known. And why? Because her family had always thought all of this was inferior, too small, unimportant. "Let's have that coffee then," she said, turning to go into the kitchen. And so it was, on that December morning, over cups of freshly brewed coffee and toast with butter from the corner bakery, that Helen began to get to know Ryan Miller, a mechanic, a single father, a lifelong resident of the town, a simple man of few words and sincere gestures who fixed engines because he liked the challenge of making things work again. The following days brought a routine Helen never imagined she'd have. Ryan showed up almost every day, bringing tools, fixing a dripping faucet, adjusting a window that was stuck. He never asked for anything in return, but Helen started to reciprocate in the way she knew how. Preparing lunches they shared on the porch, buying supplies he needed. It was on one of those afternoons while Ryan was finishing up replacing the old wiring in the living room that Isabella appeared for the first time. The girl was 5 years old, with brown hair in 2 messy braids, huge dark eyes, and a shyness that made her hide half her face behind her father. "Bella, come here," Ryan said with a sweetness in his voice Helen hadn't heard before. "Come meet Ms. Helen." The girl took 2 timid steps and stopped, holding tight to her father's jeans. Helen crouched down to her level. "Hi, Isabella. Your dad told me you love to draw, is that true?" The girl nodded without saying anything, but her eyes lit up with interest. Ryan chuckled softly and ran a hand through his daughter's hair with an automatic affection. "She's a little shy at first, but once she warms up to you, she never stops talking." Helen smiled and stood up. "I found some colored pencils in a drawer here. They've never been used. Would you like to have them, Isabella?" The girl's eyes widened, and she looked at her father for silent permission. Ryan hesitated. That pride. Helen was beginning to recognize in him, trying to refuse the generosity. "You don't have to do that, Helen." But Helen had already gone to get them. She returned with an old wooden box, opened it, and revealed dozens of colored pencils organized by shade. Isabella let out a gasp of wonder. "They belonged to Aunt Eleanor when she was young. They've been stored here for decades. I think she would have liked for a child to use them again." Ryan opened his mouth to protest again, but something in Helen's gaze made him stop. It wasn't pity, it wasn't condescending charity. It was just a genuine gesture from someone who wanted to share something good. "All right then, but only if you promise to make a really nice drawing for Miss Helen, deal, Bella?" The girl nodded enthusiastically, took the box with her two small hands, and hugged it to her chest as if it were a treasure. "Thank you," she whispered so quietly, Helen almost didn't hear. That night, while organizing old papers in the second-floor office, Helen found more photographs. Several of them showed the same women from the photo she had seen on the first day. Always. Together, always in settings that looked like workshops or studios. In some images, they were working on enormous quilts spread out on large tables. In others, they held fabrics, needles, scissors. Helen gathered all the photos and went down to the living room. She turned on the old lamp and spread the images on the coffee table. There was something there she needed to understand. Who were these women? Why did her grandmother Claire call them masters? And why had no one ever mentioned this before? The next morning she decided to look for answers. She dressed simply and went for a walk through town. Havenwood was getting more festive with each passing day. Wreaths stretched across the streets, nativity scenes appeared in shop windows, and the smell of fresh pastries wafted from the bakeries in waves that made her stomach rumble. Helen went into a craft shop on the main street. The place was small, cramped, filled with objects hanging on the walls and stacked on shelves, embroidered towels, woven rugs, cloth dolls, carved wooden objects, everything handmade, everything with that imperfection that only artisanal work has. The shop owner was a woman with completely white hair, tied in a loose bun. She wore thick glasses and an apron full of pockets. "Good morning, dear. Looking for anything special?" Helen hesitated. "Actually, I'm looking for information. I inherited my great-aunt's house, Mrs. Eleanor's, on Chestnut Street." The woman's eyes widened. "Eleanor? Oh, my goodness, she was a wonderful soul. So many people missed her when she passed. You're her relative, then?" "Great niece. I hardly knew her, to be honest. But I found some old photos in the house and got curious. Photos of women working with quilts and fabrics. One of them is my grandmother when she was young." The woman took off her glasses, wiped them on the corner of her apron and put them back on, studying Helen more closely. "Who was your grandmother?" "Claire Carter." The silence that followed was heavy. The woman went back behind the counter, shuffled some papers, then looked at Helen again with an expression that was part suspicion, part sadness. "Carter. That name carries a lot of history around here, dear. Not all of it good." Helen felt her stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" The shop owner sighed deeply. "Look, I don't know if I'm the one to tell. You. But since you're asking, I think it's best you speak with the people involved themselves. There are 3 ladies who live together in a house on the edge of town, just past the old bridge. Mrs. Amelia, Mrs. Judith, and Mrs. Teresa. They worked with your grandmother many years ago. If you want to know about those photos, they're the right people to ask." Helen wrote down the address the woman gave her and thanked her. As she left the shop, she felt a tightness in her chest. Something told her that what she was about to discover would change everything. The house was in a quiet spot, surrounded by a well-tended garden where roses, hydrangeas, and fruit-laden apple trees grew. It was a simple, single-story house, painted a pale yellow with green shutters. On the porch, 3 empty rocking chairs moved gently in the wind. Helen knocked on the door and waited. She heard shuffling footsteps and muffled voices inside. When the door opened, she found a very elderly, thin woman, her face marked by deep wrinkles, but with lively, attentive eyes. "Yes? Good morning. My name is Helen. I'm Claire Carter's granddaughter. I'm staying in the house. That was Eleanor's, and I found some old photos. I was told you ladies might be able to help me understand more about them." The woman's expression changed completely. For a moment, it seemed she might close the door, but then she sighed and made way. "Come in." The living room was cozy, filled with embroidered pillows, colourful afghans, and a large quilting frame set up near the window. Two other ladies were sitting in armchairs, one crocheting and the other embroidering a dish towel. All three stopped what they were doing when Helen entered. "Girls, this is Claire's granddaughter." The silence that fell was charged with meanings Helen couldn't decipher. The woman who had let her in pointed to an empty chair. "Sit. I'll make some coffee." While she waited, Helen observed the room. The walls had framed old photos, and in several of them she recognized a young grandmother, Claire, alongside the three ladies who were now looking at her with a mixture of curiosity and something that seemed like old resentment. When the coffee was ready, the woman who had opened the door introduced herself as Amelia. The others were Judith and Teresa. All were over 80, their hands marked by work, but with a serene dignity in the way they sat, spoke, and existed. "You said you found photos," Mrs. Amelia began. "Photos from when?" "From 1957, mostly. You all worked together, right? My grandmother, my great-aunt Eleanor, and the three of you." Mrs. Teresa, the eldest, let out a joyless laugh. "Worked, that's a nice word for it. We created, girl. We invented. Quilting patterns no one had ever seen before. Techniques we developed on our own, by experimenting, making mistakes, getting it right. We spent years perfecting every stitch, every color combination. And my grandmother was with you in this. Your grandmother and Eleanor learned everything from us," said Mrs. Judith, adjusting her glasses. "They were just young girls then, came from New York to spend some time here. We became friends. We taught them everything we knew because we believed that knowledge was meant to be shared." Helen sensed there was more to the story. "And what happened after that?" Mrs. Amelia took a long sip of her coffee before answering. "Your grandmother went back to New York. She promised she would promote our work, get us bigger orders, make our names known. And she did. Except when the orders started coming in, when the work became a real business, the name that appeared wasn't ours. It was hers. Carter Heirlooms. It became a company, a fortune, and we were left here, invisible." Helen felt the floor drop out from under her. "The Carter family built an empire on your work?" Mrs. Teresa nodded slowly. "It wasn't theft, if that's what you're thinking. Your grandmother always sent some money, a little here, a little there, like it was a favor charity. But she never publicly acknowledged that the techniques, the creations, the original patterns were ours. She sold it all as a Carter family tradition, and we let it happen because we were too simple, too poor, too uneducated to fight powerful people." The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Helen looked at the three ladies and saw not anger, but a deep sadness, a resignation of those who had carried this for decades. "My grandmother never told the family any of this. No one knows." "Eleanor knew," said Mrs. Judith. "She never agreed with what her sister did. She tried to convince Claire to do the right thing, but it was no use. That's why Eleanor moved back here. She didn't want to live in New York anymore, didn't want to be a part of it." Helen put her hands to her face. All the money, all the stores, the entire family reputation, all built on a lie, on silencing them. "Please forgive me, I had no idea." Mrs. Amelia stood up and placed a hand on Helen's shoulder. "We know, child. You're not to blame for the mistakes of those who came before you, but now that you know, what are you going to do about it?" Helen had no answer. She left that house carrying a new weight on her shoulders. The legacy she had always believed to be honest, earned, had rotten roots, and she, who had already left everything behind, now discovered that even the past she knew was a sham. When she returned to Chestnut Street, the sun was already setting. Ryan was on his porch, painting an old bicycle. Isabella was playing beside him, drawing something in a large notebook. Seeing Helen, Ryan noticed something was wrong. He put his paintbrush aside and came over to the fence that divided their yards. "Everything okay?" Helen forced a smile. "I just found out some truths about my family I'd rather not have." Ryan studied her in silence, then said simply, "Sometimes it's like that. You grow up thinking you know people, then you find out there was a whole world you never saw." Helen looked at him and for the first time noticed how kind his eyes were, how he had a way of speaking that didn't judge, only understood. "Want some coffee?" Ryan offered. "Bella just finished a drawing she wants to show you." And so it was on that cold December afternoon, drinking reheated coffee from mismatched mugs, while Isabella proudly showed off a drawing of 3 houses side by side with smiling people in the windows, that Helen began to understand that family isn't just blood. Family can be built. It can be chosen. That night, lying in Aunt Eleanor's old bed, Helen made a decision. She couldn't change the past. She couldn't undo what her grandmother Claire had done. But she could do things differently. She could, somehow, begin to right the wrong. And maybe in the process build something new, something true, something worthwhile. The idea came during a sleepless night. Helen was in the living room, surrounded by old papers, inheritance contracts, house documents. She had money saved, her own savings that had never fully depended on the family. It wasn't the Carter fortune, but it was enough. Enough to do something that mattered. The next morning she sought out Ryan before she even had coffee. He was in his shop, a modest building in his backyard where he fixed motorcycles, old cars, and anything with an engine. The place was organized the way practical men organize things. Tools hung on the wall in order of size, parts sorted into labeled boxes, the floor swept but stained with old grease. "Ryan, I need to talk to you about something." He looked up from a motorcycle engine he was taking apart, wiped his hands on a rag, and leaned against the workbench. "Go ahead." Helen took a deep breath. "I found out some things about my family. Bad things. But I want to do things differently. I want to use what I have to start over, the right way. And I need your opinion on this." Ryan watched her in silence, waiting. It was a quality of his that Helen was learning to appreciate. He didn't fill the silence with unnecessary words, he just listened. "I'm thinking of turning Aunt Eleanor's house into a community arts center, a place where the local artisans, the true masters, can teach what they know, where people can learn, create and sell their work with the recognition they deserve. I want to correct an old mistake my family made." Ryan crossed his arms, thoughtful. "It's a beautiful idea. But things like that are expensive, Helen. Renovating the house, buying materials, keeping the place running. Have you really thought this through?" "I have. I have some money. Saved. It's not infinite, but it's enough to start. And do you think people around here would accept something like this?" Ryan shrugged. "Depends on how you present it. People here are wary of big promises. They've seen too many outsiders come in with grand ideas that amount to nothing. But if you show them you're serious, that you're willing to stay and really make it happen, I think so. Would you help me? With the renovation, I mean. I can pay you for your work." Ryan's face grew serious. "Helen, I'll help because I want to. Because you're my neighbor and because it's a good idea, but you don't have to pay me. Yes, I do. You have a daughter to raise, bills to pay. Your time is worth money, Ryan." He opened his mouth to protest, but Helen held up a hand. "Please, let me do this the right way. No favors, no debts, as partners in a project." Ryan studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but on one condition. You let me decide what needs to be done first and how to do it, without trying to control everything. Do you trust me?" Helen smiled. "I trust you." In the following days, the house became a construction site. Ryan brought 2 friends who worked in construction and renovation. They started with the essential repairs: a leaky roof, old pipes that needed replacing, outdated electrical wiring. Helen worked alongside them, carrying materials, painting walls, learning that her hands could do more than hold crystal glasses. Isabella would come over after school and help in her own way, organizing paintbrushes, sorting nails by size, drawing on the old newspapers that covered the floor, and slowly the girl began to open up to Helen. She talked about school, her friends, the pictures she drew. She never mentioned her mother, and Helen never asked. She knew how to recognize an absence when she saw one. It was on one of those afternoons, while they were painting the room that would be the main studio, that Ryan finally spoke about it. Isabella had gone to get more water to wash the brushes, and they were alone. "Bella's mom left when she was 1, he said, without looking at Helen, concentrating on the wall he was painting. Said she wasn't cut out for it, for being a mother, for living in a small town. She wanted to go back to Boston, pick up the career she'd left behind, I understood. You can't hold on to someone who wants to leave." "And you stayed with Isabella?" Ryan smiled, a sad sort of smile. "It never crossed my mind not to. She's my daughter. It might have been hard sometimes, especially at the beginning, but I've never regretted it. Bella is the best thing that's ever happened to me." Helen felt her chest tighten. "You're a good father, Ryan." He finally looked at her, and there was something in his gaze. That made Helen's heart beat faster. "I do what I can. What about you? Why did you leave everything in New York?" Helen stopped painting and sat on the newspaper-covered floor. "There was nothing left holding me there. My grandmother was the only person who really cared about me. When she was gone, I realized the rest was just for show. Parties where no one really knows you, empty conversations, people who only care about what you can do for them. I got tired of it. And here, are you finding what you were looking for?" Helen looked around at the half-painted walls, the furniture covered in paint-stained sheets, at Isabella returning with a bucket full of water, careful not to spill. She looked at Ryan with his simple, honest way, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "I think so. I think here I can be who I really want to be." Ryan held her gaze for another moment, then went back to painting. But Helen saw the small smile he tried to hide. When Helen visited Mrs. Amelia, Mrs. Judith, and Mrs. Teresa again, she brought a notebook full of ideas, sketches, and plans. The 3 ladies received her with the same politeness as the first time, but there was still a distance, a caution. "I want to make you a proposal," Helen began. "I want to turn my great-aunt's house into a community arts center, a place where you can teach what you know, where your techniques are recognized and valued, where other people can learn and carry on this knowledge." Mrs. Teresa crossed her arms. "And what do you get out of it?" "Nothing. Or rather, I get the chance to do the right thing. To correct, even if just a little, but the mistake my grandmother made." Mrs. Judith shook her head. "Child, we're too old for these things. Our time has passed." "It hasn't. You still create, you still quilt, you still know everything you knew before, and there are so many people who could learn from you. Young people who need a trade, women who want to earn their own income, people who simply want to learn an art that is being lost." Mrs. Amelia went to the window and looked out at the garden. "You talk a good game, Helen, but where is this money coming from? From the fortune your family built on our work?" The truth stung, but Helen didn't look away. "Yes, but it's my money that I saved, money I'm going to use the way I see fit, and I think this is the right way to use it." The silence stretched on. Then Mrs. Amelia turned and looked at the other 2. They exchanged glances, a silent conversation between people who had known each other for decades. "We need to think about it," Mrs. Teresa finally said. "This isn't a decision to be made overnight. Of course, take all the time you need, but know that I'm going to make this happen. With or without you, it would just be so much better with you." Helen left that house without any promises, but also without any closed doors. It was a start. The renovation of the house was progressing well, but one afternoon when Ryan returned from town with a grim expression, Helen knew something was wrong. He barely spoke during work, answering in monosyllables when she asked if he wanted coffee. When the other workers had left and Isabella was busy drawing on the porch, Helen got straight to the point. "What happened?" Ryan threw the tool he was holding into a box with more force than necessary. "Nothing you need to worry about." "Ryan," he sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "The owner of the building where my shop is wants to raise the rent. 50% more, starting next month." Helen felt her stomach clench. "That's outrageous. Can he do that?" "He can. The lease allows for an annual adjustment, And it's been over 2 years since he raised it. He's within his rights. The problem is I can't afford it. I'm already stretched thin as it is. And if you don't pay, he finds another tenant. And I lose the shop my grandfather built, that my father kept, that I fought to keep from closing when he passed. Helen saw the pain on his face, the wounded pride, the fear of losing something that was more than just a workplace. It was history, roots, identity. Let me help. I can lend you the money. You can pay me back when you can. Ryan turned to her, his eyes flashing. No, I told you, I don't take charity, Helen. It's not charity, it's a loan between friends. We've barely known each other for 2 weeks. We're not close enough friends for you to lend me money I might never be able to pay back. The words came out harsher than Helen expected, and she saw she had touched a nerve. Ryan's pride wasn't empty stubbornness. It was the dignity of a man who had always supported himself with his own work, who was raising his daughter alone without asking anyone for anything. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. Ryan closed his eyes, took a deep breath. I know, I'm sorry for snapping at you. I'm just tired of depending on other people's goodwill, you know? I want to solve my own problems. I understand, but sometimes everyone needs help, Ryan. There's no shame in that. He didn't answer. He just gathered his tools and left early that day. Isabella was left wondering why her dad was so grim, and Helen also packed up her things with a heavy heart. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Ryan, about the shop he could lose, about the little girl who depended on him. That's when her cell phone rang. It was a New York number. Helen hesitated but answered. The voice on the other end was her mother's, cold as always. Helen, I need to know what you are doing in that town. Living my life, Mom. I received a very interesting call today from a lawyer saying you're spending money on renovations, that you plan to open some kind of community center. Is this true? It is. With what money? My money. From the inheritance Grandma Claire left for me. The silence on the other end was icy. That money belongs to the family. You can't just squander it on some charitable fantasy. Yes, I can. It's mine, and I'll use it as I see fit. Her mother's voice grew even harsher. Helen, you have 48 hours to come back to New York and put an end to this nonsense, or I will take the necessary legal action. What action? I will petition a judge to declare you incompetent to manage your own assets. I'll claim you're having a breakdown after the loss of your grandmother, that you're making irrational decisions. And I will win, Helen. I have the best lawyers in New York. Helen felt anger rise like a wave. You can try, but you won't succeed. I'm lucid, I'm fine, and I'm doing exactly what I want to do. She hung up before her mother could reply. Her hands were shaking as she put the phone down. She knew the threat was real. The Carter family did not accept losing control, did not accept someone using the family's money for something they didn't approve of. But Helen wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when she had finally found a purpose, a place where she could make a real difference. The next morning, she went to find Ryan early. He was in the kitchen making coffee for Isabella before taking her to school. The girl was eating toast and drawing at the same time. Can I talk to you after you get back from dropping Bella off? Ryan nodded, still a bit distant from yesterday, but when he returned half an hour later, Helen was waiting with fresh coffee and a proposal. Listen, I know you don't want to accept direct help, but what if we did things differently? What if the shop was here, in the back of my house? There's plenty of space. You could set up an even better shop than the one you have now, and you'd pay me a symbolic rent just so you don't feel like you owe me anything. Ryan shook his head. Helen, that's basically you giving me the space for free. It's not, because you'll work on the renovation of the community center in exchange. It'll be a fair trade. You get the space for your shop, I get someone I trust managing the construction. Besides, I thought the shop could be part of the center. You could teach basic mechanics to anyone who wants to learn. There are a lot of people who would love to know how to fix their own things, save money. Ryan looked at her with gratitude and something deeper. Why are you doing all this? Because I want to. Because I can. Because I met a good man who deserves for things to be a little easier in life. Ryan ran a hand over his tired face. It's hard for me to believe. I'm not used to people who help without wanting something in return. Then get used to it, because I'm here, Ryan, and I'm not leaving. He looked at her for a long moment, then extended his hand. Okay, I accept your proposal. Helen shook his hand, feeling the warmth of his calloused palm, and in that moment she knew she had made the right choice. In the days that followed, Ryan began moving things from the old shop to the space behind Helen's house. And while he organized tools and equipment, Helen received an unexpected visit. Mrs. Amelia, Mrs. Judith, and Mrs. Teresa appeared at her door on a cold December afternoon. All three were dressed in simple but neat clothes, carrying large bags. "We've come to accept your proposal," Mrs. Amelia said without preamble, "but with our conditions." Helen invited them in, served coffee, and sat down to listen. "First condition," began Mrs. Teresa, "the name of the center will be the Eleanor Vance Arts Center, because she was the only one in your family who always treated us with respect and recognized our work." Helen nodded, moved. "Perfect. And the other conditions?" "Second," continued Mrs. Judith, "we will teach what we know, but we won't accept charity. We want to be paid for our work as teachers, a fair wage. Of course, I'll draw up a formal contract. And third," finished Mrs. Amelia, "you guarantee that everything created here based on our techniques will be credited to us. Our names will be displayed. Our story will be told correctly." Helen stood up and hugged each of them, tears in her eyes. "You have my word. The true story will be told, and you will have all the recognition you've always deserved." The three ladies relaxed a little, and for the first time, Helen saw genuine smiles on those time-worn faces. They began to pull samples of quilts, fabrics, and works they had kept for years from their bags. Beautiful, intricate pieces, made with a mastery Helen had never seen before. Christmas was approaching. Only 10 days left. The whole town was preparing for the traditional festivities, the church services, the holiday dinners. And at the house on Chestnut Street, the work never stopped. Walls were painted, furniture was arranged, and the space came to life. Isabella spent her afternoons there, drawing, helping in her own little way, and growing closer to Helen. And Ryan, working side by side with her every day, also grew closer in a way that went beyond friendship. There were glances that lasted a second too long. Hands that touched, when passing tools and lingered. Conversations that stretched late into the night after Isabella was asleep, about dreams, fears, and regrets. On one of those nights, sitting on the porch with blankets over their shoulders against the biting cold, Ryan finally said what he'd been holding back. "Helen, I know we've only known each other for a short time, and I know our lives are very different. But I need to tell you something. I'm starting to feel something for you. Something I haven't felt for anyone in a long time." Helen felt her eyes sting. "Ryan, I feel it, too. But I'm scared. Scared of messing up what we're building. Scared of not being good enough for you and Isabella." He took her hand in his. "You're already good enough, Helen. More than enough. You're the most incredible person I've ever met. But I understand if you want to take it slow. Let's take it slow then. Let's see where this goes." And they kissed for the first time right there, on the cold December porch, with the sound of church bells in the distance and the scent of jasmine from the garden filling the night air. But the peace was short-lived. 3 days later, Helen was visited by 2 lawyers from New York. They brought documents, notices, legal threats. The family was making good on their promise. They wanted to have her declared incompetent, take control of her money, and force her to return. Helen read everything with her hands trembling with rage. Ryan was by her side, reading along, his expression growing darker. "Can they do this?" he asked. "They can try, but I'm going to fight. I'll hire lawyers. I'll prove that I'm perfectly capable, that all my decisions are rational and conscious." "And if you lose?" Helen looked at him, at his worried eyes, and then looked out the window to where Isabella was playing in the yard. She looked at the papers spread across the table, at the freshly painted walls of the house that was becoming a community center, at the 3 elderly ladies who would finally get their recognition. "I won't lose, because for the first time in my life, I'm fighting for something that really matters. Christmas Eve dawned with a clear sky and an intense cold. Havenwood woke to church bells and the smell of cinnamon rolls wafting from the houses. Helen woke up early, but not from holiday excitement. She woke from anxiety. That day, her family was coming. Her mother had warned her via text. They were coming to Havenwood, coming to get her, coming to resolve this situation once and for all. The family arrived at noon. 3 luxury cars pulling up on Chestnut Street drew the attention of all the neighbors. Helen's mother got out of the first car, dressed impeccably as always, followed by 2 uncles and an aunt. 2 lawyers carrying leather briefcases emerged from the third car. Helen met them at the door, without inviting them in. Her mother looked at the house, at the peeling paint, the old windows, and made a face of disdain. "So this is where you're throwing your life away." "Good morning to you too, Mum. What do you want?" Her Uncle Marcus stepped forward. "Helen, it doesn't have to be like this. We came to talk, to try to make you see reason. Reason according to you, right? Because to me, what I'm doing here makes perfect sense." Her Aunt Beatrice rolled her eyes. "Sense? Spending a fortune renovating an old house to turn it into a craft center? Giving money to old artisans no one has ever heard of? That's not sense, Helen, it's irresponsibility. Those old artisans, as you call them, are responsible for everything this family has today. They were the ones who created the techniques, the patterns, everything that Grandma Claire sold as a Carter tradition, except she never gave them credit." The silence that followed was heavy. Helen's mother turned pale. "How do you know that?" "I found out. I talked to them, I saw the proof, and now I'm going to do what Grandma should have done decades ago. I'm going to give them the recognition they deserve." One of the lawyers opened his briefcase and took out documents. "Ms. Carter, we have here a petition for a temporary injunction. If you sign, agreeing to return to New York, and cease these irresponsible expenditures, we can drop the matter and forget this ever happened. And if I don't sign, then we will proceed with the legal process, and you can be sure that we will win." Helen crossed her arms. "You can try, but you won't be able to prove I'm incompetent because I'm not. Every decision I've made here has been conscious, planned, and well thought out. I have documents, contracts, business plans." Her mother stepped forward, and for the first time, Helen saw something that wasn't just coldness. There was fear in those eyes. "Helen, please. You're my daughter. I don't want to lose you." "Then stop trying to control me. Stop thinking you know what's best for me. I'm happy here, Mom. For the first time in a long time, I'm truly happy." "Doing what?" "Playing philanthropist in a town nobody knows. Righting wrongs. Building something that matters. Helping real people. And discovering who I really am, far away from everything you all always told me I should be." Uncle Marcus snorted impatiently. "Enough of this nonsense. Helen, you have until tomorrow morning to make a decision. Either you come back with us and remain part of this family with all the benefits that entails, or you stay here and lose everything. Future inheritance, the family name, any kind of support." Helen felt the ground shake beneath her feet. It was the final ultimatum, the definitive choice. Family and money on one side, truth and purpose on the other. She looked at the rigid faces of her family. Then she looked at the house behind her, at the window where she could see Ryan in the kitchen. She looked at the yard where Isabella was drawing, sitting on the grass. "I don't need until tomorrow. I've already made my decision. I'm staying." Her mother let out a sound that was almost a sob. "Helen, you're not thinking straight. I'm thinking more clearly than I ever have in my entire life, and my answer is no. I'm not going back. I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up what I've built here." "Then you're no longer a Carter," said Uncle Marcus, in a chilling voice. Helen smiled, and there was a freedom in that smile she had never felt before. "Maybe that's the best thing that's ever happened to me." The family left without another word. The luxury cars drove up the cobblestone street and disappeared around the bend, and Helen stood there trembling not from cold but from relief, from fear, from a mix of emotions she couldn't name. Ryan came to her and wrapped her in a tight hug. "You were incredible." "I'm terrified." I know. But you were incredible anyway. That night, Christmas Eve, Helen, Ryan, Isabella, Mrs. Amelia, Mrs. Judith, and Mrs. Teresa had dinner together at the house on Chestnut Street. The table was simple, the food was homemade, but there was a warmth there that no sophisticated holiday dinner in New York ever had. Mrs. Teresa raised her glass of grape juice, a toast to Helen, who had the courage to do what she knew was right, and to Eleanor, who would have been so proud. Everyone toasted, and Helen felt her eyes fill with tears. For the first time, she was sitting at a table where she was truly loved, where people cared about her, not the name she carried or the money she had. After dinner, when Isabella was asleep on the couch under a blanket, and the three ladies had gone home promising to return early the next day, Helen and Ryan were alone on the porch. "I don't regret it," she said in a low voice, "even knowing I've lost everything." "You didn't lose everything. You gained other things, things that are priceless." Helen rested her head on his shoulder. "What if I can't keep the center running? What if the money runs out and this all goes down the drain?" Ryan kissed the top of her head. "Then we'll figure it out, together. Because you're not alone anymore, Helen." Christmas morning dawned with a special brightness. The town woke up covered in dew that sparkled like crystal in the morning sun. Helen woke up to Isabella jumping on the bed. "Aunt Helen, Merry Christmas!" The three of them went out to the porch and stood there, watching the town wake up on its most special morning of the year. And Helen understood that this was a new beginning, a clean, pure start full of possibilities. The official opening of the Eleanor Vance Art Center took place in February. The house was transformed, bright studios equipped classrooms, a small shop in the front where the artisans' works were displayed and sold with proper credit. Mrs. Amelia, Mrs. Judith, and Mrs. Teresa cried when they saw the plaque at the entrance with their names engraved, "Founding Artisans." Their faces were in a large photo on the main wall, along with the true story of how they created the techniques that sustained a commercial empire. The first class had 15 students, women of all ages wanting to learn, wanting a trade, wanting to keep that art alive. And Ryan taught basic mechanics twice a week, always to a full room. Helen's money didn't last forever, but the center began to sustain itself. The craft sales did well, and they started receiving orders from other cities. Helen got a job as an English teacher at a local school. She didn't earn much, but it was enough. She learned to live with less, to value the essential, to find wealth in things that had no price. And Ryan became her chosen family. They didn't rush into marriage, didn't make grand promises. They just lived one, day at a time, building a solid relationship based on respect, partnership, and genuine love. Isabella gained a second mother without the word ever being used. Helen was there for every school play. Every night the girl had a nightmare, every morning packing her lunchbox. And the girl blossomed beautifully, smiling more, talking more, drawing complete families that were now real and not just dreams on paper. A year after the Christmas, when Helen chose to stay, she was on the porch of the house watching the town prepare for another festive December. The lights already adorned the streets, the smell of pastries already filled the air, and the church bells were already ringing with that greater frequency that announced the arrival of the holidays. Ryan sat down beside her, putting his arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" "About how quickly life changes. A year ago I was lost, alone, not knowing who I was or what I wanted. And now look. And now I have a family. I have a purpose. I have a life worth living. No regrets." Helen thought about the bridges she had burned, the money she no longer had, the name she had lost, the family that had rejected her. She thought about everything she had left behind. Then she thought about what she had gained. Ryan's love, Isabella's affection, the respect of the masters, the gratitude of the students, the peace she felt every day when she woke up. Not a single one. Isabella came running from the house bringing a new drawing. It was their house, with 3 people on the porch. A man, a woman, a little girl. And underneath, written in a child's crooked handwriting, "My family." Helen hugged the girl, her eyes full of happy tears. Ryan kissed the top of both their heads, and the three of them stood there watching the sun set behind the Vermont mountains. In the community center, Mrs. Amelia, Mrs. Judith, and Mrs. Teresa were teaching the new class the secrets of decades of work. Their stories were finally being told. Their names were finally being recognized. The old wrong wasn't completely righted, it never could be, but it was slowly being healed. And Helen understood, on that warm afternoon of a new December, that she had traded a financial inheritance for a true legacy. She had discovered that wealth is not in what you accumulate, but in what you share. That family can be built with love and choice, not just with blood. That the past can be mended, even if it's never forgotten. And that some people possess something that no amount of money in the world can buy: character, genuine affection, and the courage to do what is right, even when it costs you everything. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Helen, Ryan, and Isabella has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of new beginnings, love, and redemption, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what part of this story resonated with you the most. Have you ever had to make difficult choices between comfort and conscience? Have you discovered that family can be built and not just inherited? Share your thoughts with us. Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, stories that reveal the deepest side of the human soul, that make us think about our own paths and choices. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on what truly matters in life.